Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Welcome to the first episode of the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Oscar and I discuss why the name change and what this means for the podcast. We also catch up on what is in store for the future of the show and how it has evolved over the years. I would also like to invite everyone out to a free webinar on April 22nd at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I will be presenting harassment and bystander intervention training to combat racism, xenophobia, and hate. The Orange County Sheriff Office will also be sharing a presentation for best practices for personal safety and awareness. Listen on to the premiere episode of the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. I'm loving these conversations and hope you are too. If you are, please rate my podcast on your platform of choice and share it with others. If you would like to support with a donation to help keep this podcast going, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan. For comments or suggestions, email me at sifumimichan@gmail.com or reach out on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan. Now on with the show. Hello, Oscar.
Hello, Mimi.
This is the first episode of the Sifu Mimi Chan Show.
Wow, that's really exciting. So we've moved on from Culture Chat podcast with Mimi Chan to now the Sifu Mimi Chan Show.
That is correct.
Awesome. I really love this. Where did this idea come from, Mimi Chan?
Oh, listeners who are listening right now and not seeing us, I want you to know Oscar is smirking. He's smirking, and I would even dare to say gloating right now, because this is going to be recorded and it will be out there for everyone to hear, but Oscar was right and I was wrong.
I'm not making any comments.
All right, I don't know.
Go on.
I don't know if I was so-called wrong, but Oscar was right in when I first started this podcast back in 2016. His suggestion was to just call it the Sifu Mimi Chan Show, and I had reservations because I thought, who's going to want to listen to just the Sifu Mimi Chan Show? And I had really had it in my head that we were going to be doing a lot of culture chats, and I thought that was like catchy, and I thought it was kind of just a stronger name for a podcast, I guess. But you had mentioned that it would be just kind of better universally for it to be called that. Actually, why don't you tell me, why did you think I should call it the Sifu Mimi Chan Show versus just Culture Chat?
Because you are Sifu Mimi Chan.
Oh my goodness.
And it just made sense that all your social media was Sifu Mimi Chan, emails are Sifu Mimi Chan, like everything, any way to find you is through Sifu Mimi Chan. You have the website Sifu Mimi Chan, I think. So I don't know. I just thought that's who you are, and I think you did great over the past few years with the show, but I don't think it would have made a difference if you started off the show with Sifu Mimi Chan, who you got on and who you didn't, by it being called Culture Chat. Because really what got people on the show is your persistence and follow through. So
that is true, and I'd love to share some persistence stories a little bit later. But yeah, it has been kind of interesting because I think it's just my hesitancy always to be overly quote unquote self-promotional, even though I'm out there as kind of a public figure, and I've been in the media, and I've been, doing all sorts of different things in the past that have led me to have this public persona. But I guess that's the martial artist in us, because I think you tend to be a little bit that way as well, where it's like, oh no, it's not all about me. This is about what I'm trying to promote, which is empathy, right? The reason I really started the show was to promote empathy. And so you're right, it probably didn't really matter what it was called, but I think there's just that hesitancy as a martial artist to be like, it's the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. But I guess I don't have that hesitancy anymore.
Right. And I think also you don't have to say it in that tone.
And I doubt I will.
Right. So I think it's going to be okay. So what made you decide then that now is the time to make this change?
Well, I actually think this is really just going to be the same show under the new name, but also really what the podcast has evolved to become is, less about just a specific subtopic and more about who I'm having the conversation with. And so it just seemed like it made a lot more sense, especially after this long year of quarantine, where I ended up just fortunately, and by a stroke of luck, talking to like Greg Rucka every week, right? And it was just like, it was him and I, and it really was less about the culture chat and more about who I was building relationships with, who I was learning from, who I ended up being able to share and be educated by and have stories. And so it really became about the relationship between me and the guest. And I think it just became more appropriate as things have progressed through this year, especially with all of the recent issues surrounding AAPI hate, all of the issues surrounding Black Lives Matter leading up from last year. It's been something that I've decided that it is about me and I'm the activist and I want to be the advocate, and I'm okay now with making sure that people know this is my voice and this is what I'm choosing to share and who I'm choosing to share conversations with.
Yeah, I agree. I think I've noticed this year, especially, you taking on a role as an activist and not being afraid to say, this is exactly how I feel, right? And the other part about it, which is kind of interesting, is they always say who learns the most is the person teaching. So, and Sifu means teacher, right? And one of the things that you usually say, you've said probably almost every podcast is, wow, I've learned so much in this conversation. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that you enjoy about it. And so, I don't know, in that realm of being a teacher and the best student is a teacher, I think it makes sense to have that name as well.
Yeah, it really resonates with me. And I think people maybe that don't know me might think, oh, that's just her kung fu title. And, like someone would like to call themselves doctor or, a guru or...
Yeah, guru is I prefer guru.
Or professor, right? I think it's less about the title and more about what that means to me. So the Sifu part of my name, one is my identity. Two, yes, you're right. Social media wise, it's pretty much kind of universal and it isn't just my name because I identify with being that teacher and being that martial arts teacher in particular. But any Kung Fu Sifu or Shifu knows that it entails a lot more than just teaching kicks and punches and actual martial arts, that there's so much more to that title. And I think you and I did a full episode on what is a Sifu. We really broke that down and went into the weeds with it. But in short here, it's like you said, it's that lifelong journey where as the instructor, you are always learning and discovering. And for me, it's such a traditional term and it encompasses all of what I hope to constantly live up to, which is mentoring my students, being that paternal figure, because in ancient times the Sifu was even more important than like a parent, and you really took on this role with your students of caring and bringing them into the world to be better humans. And it isn't just about the kung fu part, right? And so I like to be reminded of that this is my identity and this is my path that I've chosen. It's almost like that mission that I've chosen to accept type of thing, right? This is who I've decided I want to be and always continue to strive to be.
Very well said. So I guess...
Oh, go on.
Yeah. Well, let's go on then talking about what do you see moving forward. I mean, you mentioned you don't think the format's not going to change too much, but where would you like the podcast to go?
Well, what's been interesting is I started this in 2016, as you know, and most of my listeners are aware, it was pretty much after the election. I was outraged and I did want to use this platform as a voice to separate myself from my martial and my professional persona. And as this has progressed, I realized I don't really need to or want to do that anymore. Like, I kind of use this as a platform, and that's why I think initially also it was Culture Chat with Mimi Chan versus Culture Chat with Sifu Mimi Chan, because I thought, well, professionally, I don't want to step on toes, or I don't want people to be offended when they needn't be. And I think it took maybe less than a year, because as 45 actually took office, I realized, okay, I'm done. I'm done trying to hold back from expressing my views, which I did not believe to be anymore as political, but as moral and ethical compass views. So I realized that it doesn't need to be a separate voice. It didn't need to be this quote unquote other persona from my Sifu persona. And so that started to shift fairly early into the podcast, but it really started to gain momentum in the most recent last couple of years, as I actually have embraced the activism as well. So it all kind of converged. And so people might have noticed, listeners may have noticed, in the last year, I've had more repeat guests. Obviously, Greg Recca aside, he became a weekly guest and a very good friend, and I'm so grateful for that. But I've ended up going, you know what, this is less about, okay, let me see what new person I can get on the show and who I can stalk down and who I want to talk to. Because ultimately, I did want to share stories, but I realized, wow, there are a lot of people that I'm excited to speak to, and I would be really hustling to try to get those new guests, right? And I think people have realized in the last year, especially year and a half, I've had a lot of repeat guests. I mean, I've had a lot of our fitness experts on that, are your colleagues and mentors, like Mike Boyle, Dan John, and of course Brett Jones. And, we've spoken multiple times on the podcast, and I realize having that relationship and taking that journey with them has been really meaningful, as well as still introducing new guests and having new voices come on the show. I'm still very, very excited for that. But I think moving forward, Greg and we're still doing bi-weekly podcasts. So we're not going as aggressive as we were in quarantine, because he does actually have to work now and get some content out. But it also helps me out as well, scheduling wise. It's become more of, what stories are meaningful for me to share, but also who are the relationships that I've built, kind of that trust and and taking that journey with. I've really enjoyed having the conversations, for example, with Dan John on The Sword and the Stone, because it's not just about the book, like we're in a book club. It's about the philosophies that brings us, and that, that's ongoing. Like, I can continuously learn from him. And so, as he would say, gentle listeners, I apologize if, you're really just on my journey of what I'm enjoying, and hopefully you're enjoying it too.
Well, I think that's what makes a lot of interview style podcasts popular, is you connect with the host and you want to go on that journey, right? And what makes things more, this I guess is a personality thing, but some people want the repeat guest because then the relationship is deeper and richer, and there's nuance, and you can call back previous conversations or experiences, and so it's like the only analogy I can think of is Cheers, right? Like, everyone came in, that guy came in and was like, Norm, and I don't know, things like that are popular because people are comforted by what they consider as normal. So I don't know. I think it's a good way to approach it, as opposed to what I think some other podcasts, and this doesn't disparage them, where they want as much variety as possible. Mm-hmm. And it's challenging. It's because this is not your full-time job, right? You're the one who has to find guests, get guests, book them. All you're doing all the work, and this is a side gig that isn't really a paying gig, right? You still have your full-time job and other responsibilities. So I think if you making it as a projection of your voice is going to be easier for you, as opposed to making it, I need to discuss all of these different cultures.
Yeah, this is been absolutely what one would describe as a passion project. It has been a huge time commitment and a lot of work, which is why I will shout out to all my amazing patrons that have actually helped keep this podcast going. It allowed me to have someone help with the editing department so that I didn't also have to do the editing. So I'm grateful for that. There are other facets of this that I would love to be able to delegate out and pay people for so it can be taken care of. But it certainly has been helpful. So quick plug, if you want to help me out, Patreon is the best way to do that. I certainly appreciate it. I do know things are absolutely difficult. There's so many things to donate to right now. But I do find these conversations valuable. And I've been amazed at the feedback that I've gotten of, like you said, people who maybe followed because of, for example, Greg Rucka. He's got his, comic book following. And they said, but you know what? I heard the Perry Young podcast and now I'm watching Warrior and I love the show. I can't get enough of it. And so what's been nice is that through some of the conversations, like the fitness people who follow me maybe because they like to see my conversations with some of those guys, have maybe gotten to hear some of these other conversations and been exposed and eyes opened to other great guests that I've had on and have found value in it. And so those of you who do drop me those emails, I read them. I know I try my best to reply right away, but those of you who give feedback, I really appreciate that because I do know that a lot of times people will hear something, they'll enjoy it, but we don't always get that feedback. So thank you so much to those who take that 30 seconds to write something out. It really means a lot and it does help me keep going. There are times during this show I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe I should take a break or do it seasonally. But this does help me as well mentally. It gives me an outlet, but it also gives me connectivity. We're in our grind of what we do at Kung Fu every day. And while yes, we see people every day, we teach people every day, these conversations are much deeper. I mean, I've been blessed to have conversations that have gone beyond just, the surface. Like we've really dug deep into a lot of the social injustices that are happening, a lot of controversial topics and that have really challenged me. I mean, some of the conversations you and I have had, with sexual abuse or racism and inequities. I mean, they've been challenging and sometimes difficult conversations to have, but I think those are the ones we need to be having. If we are uncomfortable, then we need to push past that and we need to be able to start getting to the point where we can start feeling comfortable. And so, you mentioned that whole cheers thing. I think people on social media, I always say, O and I, blah, blah, blah. And I'm getting shout outs like, oh, you and O. And we're becoming kind of that cheers format where people know when you and I have a conversation, who knows where it's going to go. I equate it more to like the Howard Stern show that, you exposed me to many, many years ago where they would have guests on, which, I actually believe Howard Stern is one of the masters of interviewing. I think in terms of getting guests to open up and getting what listeners want to hear, but also what he wants out of them is, I think there may be none better. But oftentimes you and I would just enjoy when they went off the rails and just kind of had their conversations with one another that they've known each other for 20, 30 years, maybe more than that now. But that was always fascinating. So I hope that listeners, like you said, feel that connectivity to some of those repeat guests and maybe even you, my favorite co-host of all time.
I bet you anytime they go, oh, here I am with Oscar, that if you were to look at numbers wise, those are your lowest ratings. And I'm perfectly okay with that. I don't really need to be in the limelight. I guess the next question is, what are you hoping for? I know I already asked you, where do you see the podcast going, but what would be something that you would like to see happen this year, like kind of a more short term? We're already 4 months into the year. So what would you like to see maybe in the next few months as part of the podcast?
For the podcast, my hope is that A, I can keep going, but B, that we just get more listeners out there and that we're able to really generate more conversation, because that's kind of the byline of this is that, thanks for joining the conversation. So by no means should this just be where I'm talking to a guest and it's just kind of a experience where you're just kind of listening in. I do want to hear from listeners. I do want to hear questions. I was considering perhaps even doing more like Instagram lives where we take this live and we can take live comments and Q&A and things like that. It's just that all of these technological things and extra steps from my normal format does take more resources. So obviously getting support for that, whether it's, volunteer support or whether it's, finding more listenership so that we can, have kind of more resources, that would be beneficial. But I do really think it would be great to have some interactive formats where listeners can join that conversation. And so, in the past, people knew during quarantine, I'm going to be talking to Greg Rucker every week. So they would submit questions. I would put it out there on social media, and that was great. And so maybe I need to do a better job of putting out there like, hey, this guest is upcoming. Anybody got questions for them? Because then I think it really helps listeners kind of feel more connected, especially they've always expressed how cool it was to hear their question on air.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. My only suggestion is, don't take on more work. I can just put that out there. Right.
That's not my forte. My forte is getting work done, but my weakness is taking on too much, as you know. And so I did want to mention that, one of the things that I have been doing, like you mentioned, is okay, don't maybe try to jump in and get all this done right away, but I've been trying to do more live posts. I've been trying to kind of put stuff out there in content so that I can get some feedback and where it's a little bit less pressure than trying to coordinate guests and trying to coordinate this grand thing. So yes, I think my tendency is to take on too much, but I definitely am really just driven, especially from the events of the last several months, from the civil unrest at the Capitol to the anti-Asian hate crimes. I've been supercharged, and I'm sure I'm going to crash soon, but I have been so inspired by the work of, Amanda Nguyen and her advocacy and her activism. And I just feel like even doing my small part, which is in the grand scheme of things, I feel like nothing, right? I don't feel like it's enough, but I do feel like, well, if I reach even a small percentage of people, if I've helped anyone, or if I've enlightened or brought information that brings awareness, I think it's worthwhile. So for example, this week on Thursday, I'm hosting this seminar for bystander and harassment training. So I'm personally doing the harassment and bystander intervention portion, which, as you know, I'm not some, tactical ops expert, but of course, as a martial arts instructor, having my experiences as somebody who has experienced trauma and high stress and harassment, I feel like I do have some value to provide. And then I also made the decision to incorporate and involve and partner with local law enforcement here. And because I really feel like there is a huge disconnect between the community and law enforcement, and I think that's going to be ongoing. But I want my AAPI community to feel comfortable calling and reaching out for help if there's a hate crime, for being able to feel like that resource is there. They are there to serve and protect us as citizens. And often that doesn't happen. Like, what are we seeing now? We've got the Chauvin trial. I am in tears turning on the internets every day, seeing yet another police shooting or another fatal murder. And it's enraging. So on one hand, I am like one of the biggest critics of law enforcement. I was on the Orange County Safety Task Force recently, and I was like one of four of us that stood up, raised our hand to vote into an action against like a room of 50 people or so, like, hey, we want to stop over policing. We want police to be held accountable. There was some clauses in there, and it was very hard to stick my neck out while the sheriff was 4 seats down, by the way. And so it wasn't easy to do, but I do feel like those are the right things to do. But on the flip side, I absolutely think that we should feel comfortable and empowered to know that there are officers that do want to help us, and that we should find a way to work together at the end of the day, because they're not going anywhere and neither are we. I kind of went off on a tangent there.
Yeah, that was a pretty cool tangent, and I don't know what question prompted that, to be honest with you. So, but
taking on too much.
Yeah, I guess that's what it is. Yeah, just taking on too much. So, I guess to wrap things up, is this a good segue? Is this a good wrap-up segue? Or do you want to keep going?
Oh, no, I just wanted actually to invite everybody out to that webinar.
Oh, that's what it was. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so I do want to invite everybody to that webinar. It is free, and even though it is for, Central Florida in terms of law enforcement, I think they're going to be doing a presentation on personal safety, which I think can be applied to anyone, anywhere. And I do want this partnership to be seen as their, somewhat of an olive branch, somewhat of an outreach to show that, they do care and do support our community and do want us to be safe. I've been pleased with the sheriff response in actually his social media post saying that he will not stand for racism or xenophobia, and that he stands with us, and that he has enacted, a support group, as well as voted for things that have, tried to protect us. So on that stance, I'll be watching. So if it doesn't go, like I said, I'm the biggest critic. I have actually had him on the show where I've hounded him on systemic racism and hounded him on the fairness of prosecution and law enforcement. And so I'm definitely, I have an interesting dynamic with him, but I do invite everybody to come out and listen, because I really feel that they will be sharing things that are relevant to your safety, that you can learn. And we should be open-minded enough to learn from them, because they are also out there doing work as well. So I want that connectivity. And then for me, I'm not gonna lie, guys, like I did take on too much this week. I was literally, I think, over 8 hours, maybe longer, 10, 12 hours yesterday working on this presentation. So hopefully it's good on the de-escalation and the tactics for harassment and bystander intervention. I want to be able to share anything that I've learned, and I want to be able to empower people. So I do invite everybody to come out. I will link that here. Please join our webinar. We are also going to be streaming live on Facebook on the Wallam Temple site. So I want everybody to be empowered, and I want us to all feel like we are taking steps in that right direction for safety of ourselves, but also of one another. I mean, I know that you and I have been in situations in the past where it's like, well, do we intervene? What's the quote unquote right thing to do? Before we close out, I did want your thoughts on that, because obviously I just kind of ran with this, and I mean, you've been helping me with the presentation, and you've been always nothing but supportive, but I'm curious as to, what your thoughts are on intervention, and what your thoughts are on, when you see someone harassed, what is the right thing to do? I mean, you grew up in a place where there was a lot of attacks and harassment and, robberies and murder. But I mean,
wow, it sounds like a fun place to grow up.
What is your take? Because you've lived and existed in so many different types of neighborhoods. So I'm so curious as to how you see things.
So this is a question regarding, what are my thoughts on intervention?
Yeah.
I think there's different layers. Any person is going to intervene when their loved ones are being harassed or in danger, right? So like, I think, when you think of your immediate family and friends and people that you know and love, you're going to do whatever you can in that situation. Sometimes maybe to your detriment, but that's just kind of like instinct, right? And then the other part is, okay, you're just out and about and you see a stranger, something happening there. I think my normal instinct in both cases is, maybe it's because of the way that I grew up. My first instinct is what's the worst thing that can happen, because there's a difference between someone getting harassed and then like atypical violent interaction. So harassment, and I guess my concern is always, well, one can turn to another pretty quickly. And so if I were seeing something happening, I would hope that I would do the right thing, but I think my first instinct would be to look and say, okay, what is the worst possible thing that can happen here? Not just to the person who's being harassed, but to myself, to, like to everything else. And then I think I would proceed from there. I don't know if that is kind of ducking the question, because it depends. It depends on what you're seeing.
Absolutely.
Right?
No, I think you're 100% right there. And that is actually part of the advice that we give, right? Is to make sure you are assessing the situation. One of the things I will be going over, spoiler alert for the webinar, is that you have to remember your personal safety is paramount. Because if you do try to intervene and then you end up dying or getting hurt, that defeats the purpose of you helping that person. So for sure, learning to assess the situation is a huge part of intervention, because you have to have that awareness. But I just find it interesting because, we always talk about the differences of how we grew up, what we've been exposed to. And so I think we look through different lenses when it comes to, hey, stay out of that. That's not your business. Or do you feel that, inherent need to protect those who aren't able to protect themselves or that are being bullied? And there's just so many gray areas there. But we will be covering some of that, of course, at the webinar, and we will be discussing this more, I think, in the future. I think this would be a great way to kind of open this up for questions and see what people think and what you want us to answer, what you want us to discuss as we talk about, yes, I'm angry seeing elderly Asians being attacked. What do I do about it, though? Is posting and reposting enough? Is, speaking out if somebody says something that, racial, is that enough? Like, I think all of us have the desire for it to stop. I think a lot of us are feeling helpless and unable to contribute, right? And so I want to highlight several different ways to ally, several different ways to, be empowered yourself. And so I think over the next several weeks, that's kind of something that I would like to focus on, and perhaps you'll come back and talk to me about it.
Of course. I mean, I'm only a few feet away from you most days, so I'm more than happy to get on the podcast. This is, obviously to all of your loyal listeners who are just dying to hear me again. I don't want to disappoint them.
Right. Well, you are one of those repeat co-host guests, so we always appreciate having you on. But thank you for having this conversation with me about this whole transition to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show, and for being supportive and for being right. So I just thought that you would enjoy having this conversation with me, since it's one of those times where you can revel in that you kind of had the right instinct, and I probably should have listened to you at the time, but I think... well, I have a really bad memory, so I probably will forget that I was right on anything. And things will go back to normal in a few minutes. Excellent, excellent. Well, as always, thank you so much, Oscar. And to our listeners, thank you for being amazing and sticking with me all these years since 2016. Technically, I think my first episode launched in January of 2017 or towards the end. I actually have to look that up. I have no idea. But those of you who've been with me from the beginning, I am so grateful to you, and hopefully this name change doesn't make you go, oh, unfollow, I don't want to listen anymore, because they're still going to be the same format of conversation, same level of interest and encouragement and promotion of empathy that we very much need in this world. And so just thank you to those who have sent in positive reinforcement and your encouragement. And of course, a huge, huge shout out to all my patrons of this show. You guys have been incredible in helping keep this podcast going, and I appreciate you. Thanks, guys. That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/Sifu Mimi Chan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.